Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pamela Robinson, and I will be your chair for this afternoon's webinar on the future of international collaborative engineering. I work in the water and wastewater engineering sector, and that's my background. Can I ask that all questions are written in the chat, and I will be asking those to our presenter at the end of the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, there'll be details on how to gain a CPD certificate should you want one. And if you could provide us feedback on the webinar today, that'd be very helpful too. The webinar today is to look at the future of international collaborative engineering. And we have with us today the author of the 2022 report on A Manifesto for the Future of International Collaborative Engineering. The report goes into the challenges and opportunities for international engineering collaboration, focusing on COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and emerging geopolitical trends, to name but a few. In order to tackle the global challenges, we require increased collaboration across many sectors, including engineering and internationally. The report focuses on engineers as we have the key role to provide the future collaboration due to our skill sets in the scientific, social, and economic knowledge. The report focuses on 3 case studies on collaborative collaboration, which will go into more detail. In all 3 cases, the legacy is a previously unthinkable way of collaborating to achieve high standards of engineering and create a new approach to innovation, which has yielded impressive results. Our speaker today is no stranger to the IMechE. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institute. He is the immediate past chair of the Process Industry Division. He represents the IMechE on the UK Infrastructure Operators Adaptation Forum. He's also a member of the Adaptation to Climate Change group of the BSI committee. He's been lead author on numerous peer-reviewed papers through leadership reports and policy papers, and has been featured in hundreds of press articles, broadcast media appearances, conferences, and webinars. He's a recognised expert on climate change mitigation and adaptation with specialist knowledge of clean energy, sustainable cooling, process engineering-based industries, and sustainable food systems. He works as an independent consultant operating at the intersection of science, engineering, policy, business, communications, and has previously been employed in small and large commercial enterprises, government agencies, and educational institutes based in the UK, Netherlands, Canada, and Australia. So he certainly has a breadth of knowledge. So without any further delay, let me hand over to our speaker for this webinar, Dr. Tim Fox.
Thank you, Pam. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. Can I just check, Pam, that the screen is showing the slides and that you can hear me?
Yes, I can see the slides. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, once again, thank you to everybody online joining us for this webinar this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, actually, just after 12. I'm going to walk you through the report that we produced last year and published last year as part of our 175th anniversary celebrations, that looks at the future of international engineering collaboration within the context of a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape across the globe. So I'm going to spend a few moments giving you an introduction to the report and the background behind it, and how it was produced by the institution. And then I'm going to provide some wide-ranging context on the issues that face us geopolitically as we move into the third part of the 21st century. And I'm going to lay out a case for us needing to address the trends towards isolationism and become more focused on international collaboration when trying to deal with some of the large-scale and challenges that cross-border challenges that we face today as a global society. I'm going to look at how engineers have traditionally collaborated so that we can understand where engineers have come from in the collaborative space, and whilst doing that, I'll start to lay out some of the key challenges to international collaboration as we see them today. And accepting that we do need more international collaboration to tackle some of these major global challenges, I'm going to look at how we can prepare engineers for international collaboration, and in particular, what we need to do within our educational and training systems to encourage more development of skills and transfer of knowledge on collaboration. I'm going to spend a few moments talking about international collaboration within the context of government and strategies that need to be put in place to encourage and empower international collaboration, and then finish with some recommendations, not only for government, but for us as a profession, the industry more broadly, and business and the public sector. So just to start, there's a quote at the bottom of the screen there that comes from the report, and I think this will really underpin the sort of tenet of the talk. The need for cross-sector, cross-discipline and cross-border engineering collaboration has arguably never been so acute, and I'm going to explain why that is within the next 5 minutes or so. So just to lay out the background to the report. The report was instigated by the IMechE European region, so part of our volunteer network across the globe. And the idea was to develop a thought leadership report and manifesto that addressed the agenda for international collaborative engineering. And we felt that this was timely for us as a profession to do last year, to reflect on the nature of collaboration prior to and during and now post the COVID-19 pandemic. Pandemic had given us many, many insights into aspects of international engineering collaboration that we had not really been able to realize or vision prior to the pandemic, and a lot of experience from the pandemic was built into this manifesto. And essentially the report looks at the role of international collaboration for us as a profession and more broadly, as we as engineers help tackle the really pressing cross-border issues that we face around environmental health and socio-economic challenges. So let's just have a look at the context behind all of that. And the key trend that we need to examine is the shift towards isolationism that is taking place in geopolitics all around the world. So to do this, I want to sort of compare and contrast where we were in the Cold War, when we had the Soviet Union bloc and the Western bloc as the two principal blocs within the world, lining up against each other, and where we have got to post the 1990 collapse of the Soviet Union and moving into the new millennium that we find ourselves in now. So many of you listening, and myself included, will recall having been educated and trained as engineers during the Cold War, that large-scale international collaborative engineering at that time was very commonplace, and there were two key drivers to that. So this is in the post-1950s, post-Second World War period. And those two key drivers were the military industrial complexes on both sides of the Iron Curtain, and the post-war growth, the simultaneous post-war growth on the Western side of the Iron Curtain in affluence, consumerism, and populations, and all of that fueling demand for energy, produce, agricultural produce and other produce, and goods, manufactured goods. And that led to, so both those drivers led to very widespread collaboration, both around military industrial projects and projects based on the extraction and use of energy, produce, and the manufacturing of goods. So if we think of the explosion in work on oil and gas, exploration and processing that took place globally at that stage, driving huge international collaboration in the private sector, and then the large-scale military industrial, particularly aerospace projects that were happening in that same period. And engineering careers at that time were characterized by periods of time in working in international collaboration, whether you were working in civil, military, public, or the private sector. And very large-scale nations and relatively small nations collaborated globally as a commonplace exercise, both outside of course, and inside of the Soviet Union. Now, since the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and a transition to a new world order that indeed is now changing again, we found ourselves in a period of time where Cold War alliances and those military industrial complexes were being repurposed, as many of them were no longer deemed to be needed. And that was impacting on international collaboration. And widespread economic uncertainty, if you recall the 2008 global economic collapse, increased threats of terrorism following 9/11, had led again to less opportunity for international collaboration. And slowly over the last decade, we have seen, and it's well documented, a pervasive emergence of a nationalist sentiment in many, many countries around the globe. So the emergence of right-minded, either far right or right of center political dominance in countries, or in many countries around the globe. And this has led to a shift, a discernible shift away from international collaboration as a norm, towards nations that do have capability and capacity to do so, going it alone. And evidence for this is all around us. If we look to the recent developments in the United States, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, with a strong emergence of the America First concept, and developments that follow that through in terms of international and foreign policy and global activity in global affairs. And some evidence for this is very clearly seen in the increased tension between the US and China, and elsewhere in the world between Australia and China, around their trade relationships. Of course, within the last year, we've seen an increasing assertive position, global position from the Russian Federation. And again, as I said, we've seen the emergence of right-leaning politics in a myriad of European countries. And even the global response to COVID-19 showed the emergence of, in many cases, vaccine nationalism. That became a real thing for many countries, where vaccines were developed and were focused with priority on national interests. So the reality, the global political reality today, is that a small number of very economically powerful and resource-rich countries can undertake really large-scale complex programs in total isolation. So think of the United States and China, for example, whereas the other 190 plus countries in the world cannot, and really need to rely on international collaboration to be able to make progress towards tackling any of the chronic global problems that we now see. And in fact, more broadly, it's an imperative that all countries in the world are orientated and minded to undertake international development programs to tackle the large-scale global challenges that we now face. So the sort of challenges I'm talking about are climate change and sea level rise, the issues of waste and dealing with waste, and pollution and environmental degradation, the demise of ecosystems all around us, leading to mass extinction events, and natural resource depletion that threatens the very notion of infinite economic growth, which I think is becoming more widely understood as not really tenable. And of course, beyond those sort of environmental and natural resource issues, we've got very kind of human-focused issues around further epidemics, pandemics, and other health crises. Now, most of these do not respect borders, and none of these issues can be tackled by one country alone looking at trying to solve those challenges within the confines of their own physical borders. This needs international collaboration, both in terms of the governance system to be put in place to deal with these issues, but also very squarely on engineering. And what we need is large scale, holistic and complex systems level responses to these issues that are multidiscipline. So not just cross-discipline, multidiscipline. So involving engineers and many other professions and involving multiple technologies and across multiple geographies. And this is in contrast to where our geopolitical reality is today. And engineers are needed to integrate between scientific, social, and economic knowledge, and to collaborate globally with other technical and non-technical professions to achieve these goals. So engineers sit at a fairly unique position in many cases between the scientific and social goals and the implementation of technologies and approaches that deliver economic and socio-economic benefits whilst mitigating and avoiding impacts on the environment and ecosystems, etc. So it's really important that engineers come together globally and not only seek to collaborate, but advocate for collaboration in a world where we would be demanding a reversing of this isolationism trend. So let's understand how engineers have collaborated, how they do collaborate before we move forward with what needs to be done. So engineers collaborate daily within and across sectors and national boundaries, even within the current global geopolitical trend towards isolationism. Engineers are still collaborating wherever they can to achieve engineering outcomes that are to the benefit of society. And we do this as a profession, formally and informally. So formally as employees of public, private, civil, military, and academic organizations, and within those settings, we collaborate both within our companies and within our organizations, and then across with companies and organizations that we might want to collaborate with. But outside of that formal setting, we as engineers collaborate continuously as volunteers participating in professional bodies such as the IMechE. We're doing that today. And through sitting on national and international committees such as BSI committees, International Standards Organization, ISO committees, all sorts of technical committees and advisory committees. And while we're doing this collaboration, we're doing it around large and small scale projects, and many of these are strategic, and those strategic projects are driving knowledge, particularly if we're in the private sector looking to share resources for to develop new products, to drive innovation, and in many cases to find ways to market entry and ownership of markets. And one of the key findings of the research that we did for the report, which I should say was a huge exercise in collaboration itself, involving many engineers from across the IMechE membership, across the globe, but also external subject matter experts who contributed collaboratively and cooperatively towards the development of the report. And one of the key findings we found during that research phase was that efficient, effective, and successful collaborations are typically based on a number of clearly defined characteristics. And these are really around the goal and mission. If the goal and mission is highly motivating to the work, then collaboration is typically successful. And if in addition, the partnerships that are developed to undertake that collaboration are based on pre-existing or preferred or desired working relationships. So in many cases, engineers have very clear preferred working relationships for technical reasons. They recognize potential experts in certain areas and wish to collaborate with them when developing solutions and approaches. And if those can be empowered and facilitated, then this increases dramatically the likelihood of an efficient, effective, and successful collaboration. And the number one criteria for success is really around this goal and mission alignment. So if there's a sense of common worthwhile purpose, think, for example, of the Apollo moonshot program. That's a classic example of where the goal and mission alignment amongst all the collaborators was sufficiently strong and powerful for those collaborators that it gave them a sense of common worthwhile purpose to collaborate that went beyond any issues around cultural differences between teams and individual employees or players within that team, any concerns around misaligned political systems, and indeed drove and motivated to work to overcome any technical challenges that presented themselves. So at the end of the day, like all forms of collaboration, engineering collaboration is less about the technology itself and more about the people, human interaction, and behaviors. Two examples within the report. We have a number of case studies in the report, and two examples that show this mission goal focused success, which I encourage you to have a look at, that are case studies that came out of the pandemic, were one from Fujifilm, who provided a case study around a project that they had undertaken to triple a facility's batch rate to support the manufacturing of the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. And the other was University College London's Institute for Healthcare Engineering's UCL Ventura team, who were responding to the chronic shortage of breathing apparatus within the National Health Service, and looked to reverse engineer an off-patented continuous positive airways pressure device, improve its design and manufacture it and get it into hospital testing within 100 hours of the decision to move forward with the project, which was a remarkable achievement and really overcame not only all the engineering issues, the multidisciplinary working issues, but also the regulatory barriers to achieving that. And everybody came together from all those different disciplines to ensure that there was an efficient and effective and successful outcome to the project. And all of these were global, multidisciplinary, collaborative efforts, because both these teams were composed of elements across the world. So let's have a look at addressing the key challenges of international collaboration as they face us within the engineering community. And again, the extensive research undertaken for the report showed that some of the challenges associated with enabling us as engineers to collaborate internationally sat around the issue of information communications and technology and tools, which in many cases both help and hinder us as engineers from working collaboratively, on the hindering side due to misunderstandings arising or different approaches to documentation control, quality control, intellectual property control, etc. And often there are subtle differences in language use that lead to challenges within the engineering workplace across different countries. Differences in societal and workplace cultures. And this is quite a significant challenge potentially, where the cultural norms in one workplace in one part of the world are quite different when contrasted with the societal and workplace behavioral norms in another culture, another geography. And these can lead to significant issues within teams that are collaborating on projects. And often the practices and culture in one country may be seen as discriminatory by those within the team from another country. And this may lead to quite significant tensions within teams. And engineers need to be prepared and trained to be able to deal with these, to ensure that we have more effective and successful international collaboration. And the approaches we can take are around awareness raising of these. So that's a very good starting point. If we're aware of what those issues are, then we can set off on a journey to tackle them. And if we can develop an understanding and respect for other people's cultures and workplace behavioral norms and practices, we can begin to create an environment where we can find ways to enable us to mitigate those. We need to explore the provision of appropriate ICT tools. Many countries have different preferences for ICT tools. They see different tools as being more or less appropriate to work environments and to social environments. And we need to be able to, for any particular project, reach a consensus around the tools and their appropriate use. Personal exchanges are, of course, very important. People-to-people exchanges help to develop relationships within teams. And indeed, although we learned an awful lot during the pandemic around our abilities to work online and within a virtual space, it was very clear from the research for the report that focused face-to-face, in-person collaborative meetings, particularly at key milestones within projects such as the start, key delivery milestones, and the end of a project, are incredibly important for establishing a team, an effective working team. And we found that there's a very real need for education, training, and skills development in this area. It's a very poor landscape at the moment for preparing engineers to enter this space, which is largely built around people skills rather than engineering technical skills. And where there's also a lack of understanding of the needs for leadership of teams working in international collaboration. And we need to recognize and manage the challenges our leaderships are presented with, and to train them to effectively deal with those challenges. And this is a core ingredient for successor projects. So how might we go around preparing engineers for international collaboration? The key is the development of people-centered knowledge and skills. And again, within the research for the work, we found a number of topics that came up over and over again. And it was very clear that for those that had the aptitude and the orientation towards the development of language skills, that those developments should be encouraged, not just for the ability to communicate internationally, but also for the development of cultural awareness and an understanding of behavioral norms. Often the development and the adoption of language skills leads to a much deeper and much broader understanding of the society in which those languages are used, and therefore enhances a team member's ability to work and deal with those differences in cultural and behavioral norms. It was very clear that there needed to be skills developed for establishing and managing relations across cultures and disciplines, regardless of whether languages fit within the aptitude of those within the team. We found that it was really important that everybody within the engineering profession has a grounding in issues that can arise due to cultural differences and misunderstandings within international collaborations, and a basic understanding of the methods, tools, and approaches, as well as the strategies that can be adopted to avoid those. And it was really important that leadership skills and techniques are developed for international collaboration to ensure that team leaders and senior management within organizations that are collaborating internationally understand the challenges and why issues arise, and have the appropriate skill sets and knowledge to be able to tackle them. So let's have a look at where we are with collaboration in the curriculum. There are two elements to the point at which we can make a transfer of knowledge and the development of skills into the engineering profession. There's clearly when individuals start their journey within the profession through the education and training system, through higher education and further education. And then, of course, there's the ongoing continuous professional development route for those of us that are already within the profession and have been in it for some time. So I'm going to focus here on the point of the start of the journey. And what we did within the project is we looked to take the UK as a case study in terms of where it is regarding the teaching and learning of international collaborative knowledge and skills. And we felt that was justified because the UK standard for professional engineering competence, which is the starting point for any such analysis, is a good example as it sits within a governance structure, an international structure that ensures that standard and for professional engineering competence is at an international level, and therefore achieves appropriate recognition. So if it's appropriate in the UK, it's highly likely to be appropriate elsewhere in the world. So at the basic starting point, through being a signatory of the Sydney and Washington Accords, the UK's requirements are typical of the profession globally. So beyond UK spec, we looked at the learning outcomes in UK Engineering Council's accreditation for higher education programs that effectively cascades from the spec. And as I mentioned, these are compatible with standards for of the International Engineering Alliance in terms of mandatory learning outcomes, and the UK meets or exceeds the required thresholds on those, and it's aligned with the European Network for Accreditation of Engineering Education. And our findings were quite stark in that there were no specific requirements within any of that for the development for developing an understanding of, or indeed knowledge of, or know-how or skills for collaborative working, either within the discipline itself. So, for example, within mechanical engineering itself, or civil engineering, or chemical engineering itself, or more broadly in the context of multidisciplinary international relationships. And to tackle this, it was very clear that adding an additional specific learning outcome for the teaching of this would prove very challenging, and the timescale for change is very long, because these documents only come up for revision every 5 years, and many of the challenges, and it's quite a process to get a change made, quite rightly, relies on consensus building, and many of these challenges that we face are on a timescale that is too long to wait for that. And so we identified opportunities in existing learning outcomes where the topic could be logically integrated. So rather than seek to change everything at the fundamental level, we looked for opportunities that exist for building in the transfer of knowledge and the development of skills in international collaboration. And such intervention points might include, for example, modules on design, project management, dissertation assignments, and project work, etc. And as part of the research, we did find within existing learning outcome requirements lots of evidence of good practice, and some of it's shown there on the screen, taking place, an innovative practice taking place within academia and within the teaching community across the UK and more broadly internationally. And what we but we identified that there needed to be a lot more, and that these sort of successful innovations really needed to be widely disseminated to raise awareness of what can be done within existing curricula. And then beyond the curricula, of course, there's opportunities to gain experience of collaboration outside of academia. For example, sandwich courses that have been with us for a long time traditionally involve periods of industrial experience, and that's a great opportunity to get involved in international collaboration, sponsorship with summer placements or international internships. And then there are organizations, for example, the Association for the Exchange of Students for Technical Experience, that are specifically focused on providing periods of time where outside the curricula, students can gain international collaborative experience and skills. But again, we need a lot more of this. So beyond the curricula, I want to talk about, for just briefly for a few moments before we move to the recommendations and Q&A, about the need for international collaboration strategies within government policy. So what we are looking to achieve, or what we are advocating should be achieved in the policy domain, is a shift towards, or a move towards, interventions that reverse isolationism as we see it in global geopolitical trends today. And this is critically important. And it's critically important that economically powerful nations like the UK and the United States, for example, and many North European countries with traditions of engineering collaboration show really clear leadership in international collaborative working across all sectors. And this is essential for all the reasons that I lay out at the start of the talk. And that those countries reach out to nations large and small to create engineering-based industrial, business, and public sector collaborations. And we need national policy responses within those countries that create, embed, and implement international collaboration strategies at the national policy level. And they need to be based on instigating from a holistic and whole systems perspective, not a siloed perspective, with sustainability absolutely at the core of everything that is proposed in terms of intervention. And we need our governments to strongly encourage, nurture, and support and sustain these international collaborations, and to constantly be chipping away at this trend of isolationism that we see developing across the world. So what are the recommendations from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers as a result of the research and the report itself? For governments, we need to develop and implement international collaboration strategies, as just outlined, to drive industrial, business, and public sector collaboration to meet these major global challenges. For industry, business, and the public sector, we need to recognize the importance of international collaboration in tackling major global issues, and indeed empower managers within those organizations to support their engineers in meeting the challenges of collaborative working. And as discussed, that requires the training of those managers and leaders to understand the issues. And we need the professional bodies such as the Institution of Mechanical Engineers to lead the preparation of engineers at all stages in their professional journey, from the very start right the way through to retirement, to meet these challenges of effective and efficient international collaboration. It's going to be absolutely critical to meeting a future, or creating a future sustainable and successful outcome for the human race. So thank you very much for your time. We're going to move into a question and answer session now, chaired by Pam. But before we leave to that, I just should highlight that if you would like a CPD certificate as a result of attending this talk, then please email Murat at the address given on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for that. Let's start off with some of the questions, if I get them up on my screen. So if we start with, can you give any good examples of countries that are internationally collaborating and have put that at the top of their agenda?
Yeah, I think this is really important. I talked about how we're not doing it properly. But I think it's really important to highlight those countries that are. And as you might expect, the Swiss government are showing real sort of leadership in developing international collaborations and putting it at a high level within their policy agenda. So within the Swiss government's international cooperation strategy and foreign policy strategies, they have a very clearly identified objective and priority around climate change and dealing with its effects and managing natural resources. And within that, there's a strong emphasis on using cooperation, international cooperation and collaboration as a key tool to delivering on their ambitions to help meet not only reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but also in adaptation to the climate change that is already starting to happen around us. So, their whole policy in that area is developed around the notion of collaboration and cooperation. So I think that's a good example. And of course, a lot of engineering fits very squarely within all of that. So yeah, that's a good example. And but we need more examples of that. And we need much more of it globally.
Thank you, Tim. A question coming: how do you think we go about breaking down the challenges of culture and we didn't design that, so why should we take that on board way of thinking? Yeah,
I mean, this is again, this is this can be a bit of a common theme within engineering, within when engineering organizations or different teams come together, and I think this goes back really to starting at the very beginning of an engineer's journey within the academic environment, and to really instill, like Blackpool through a piece of stick of rock, that collaboration is absolutely essential to solving these huge global challenges, and that without it, we really, we're not going to be successful. And indeed, we need international collaboration because these challenges do not respect borders. And I think it's really teaching and developing skills to be more open to alternative approaches to solutions and alternative designs to solutions, and to recognize the benefits of those, and to be open to moving beyond one's own particular relatively narrow sort of siloed set of solutions. So I think that has traditionally been a bit of a challenge within the engineering profession, and I'm quite happy to admit that when I started engineering, I was a bit like that. But we do need to. There does need to be a shift, beyond into that, given the challenges we face now.
Thank you, Tim. I suppose supporting that with the IMechE and the chartership interviews, and the competencies rather. Competency E supports collaboration, sustainability and all those. Maybe it should be expanded perhaps to include more collaboration inside that competency, but it certainly goes a long way towards supporting what we're after.
Yeah, I think that's important, Pam. I mean, it comes back to the role of organizations like the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. These professional bodies do have strong influence over the future of our profession, and we do have two dimensions that, as you say, there is actually the setting of criteria for the accreditation of university degrees, and then there is also more broadly that continuous professional review process, and looking for evidence of collaboration within that, and particularly international collaboration, I think could be an important way of moving the needle on that, through our influence.
Thank you, Tim. Where are we on building the skill set into engineering courses for collaborative engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, we did a huge amount of research for the report, where we interviewed numbers of academics across not only the UK but Europe, and then more broadly, to try and understand how much innovation was going on around the development of collaborative skills, particularly international collaborative skills, within the confines of existing curricula. So as I mentioned, the existing frameworks and criteria that are the sort of the basic requirements for the profession do not feature collaboration or collaborative engineering, international engineering in any shape or form. There are obviously requirements around development of project work and project skills, and but there's not, if you like, so that there's an implication of collaboration, but there's not a direct requirement of the teaching of collaborative skills. So to answer the question, where are we? We're in not a very good place. And, so we need, given the timescale involved in both the emergence of these challenges, and the timescale involved in developing changes to these criteria, our opportunity is really to take that innovation on board and to enable academics to be more innovative and trainers to be more innovative in teaching within existing learning outcomes, like project management and collaborative assignment work, group assignment work, where collaboration is ultimately key. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. I mean, the short answer is we're not in a great place, but there's a lot of innovation going on, and what needs to be done is raising awareness of that innovation and inspiring of others to take that innovation forward. And again, I think there's a role for the institution in that. In other engineering institutions, there's a lot, potentially, we saw a lot that could be done within the confines of existing accreditation and specifications.
Thank you, Tim. It just highlighted to me, on every project that we look at now, we look at CDM, so cradle to grave philosophy. Is this a similar approach that we need to adopt for collaborative working? That we should have the legislation in place and be thinking of this within our projects?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if we had the airtime and bandwidth in terms of a profession, we would, and if we were able to respond quickly, then certainly a regulatory approach would be quite useful in terms of changing the requirements of engineering education and continuous professional development to ensure that that just became a fundamental part of what we did, and building into standards and engineering codes of practice and design codes, I think would be useful. But I think all of these routes require a lot of consensus and a lot of advocacy work to get to a point where something can change. But yes, in principle, I think it needs, as I said earlier, it needs to be like Blackpool running through a stick of rock in the profession. I mean, the journey's not impossible, because if you think 20 years ago or so, sustainability itself and cradle to grave as a concept would have been seen as a very niche outlier by the engineering profession. I've been in the profession and within the institution long enough to know and to have seen that we've moved within 2 decades from a point where it was considered as a bit of a niche interest to actually becoming a fundamental core part of what we do as a profession and our requirements of a profession within our code of conduct and our various professional review requirements. Sustainability is right in there. So it's not impossible, but it takes time. 20 years is a long time, and in 20 years' time, many of these challenges would have become absolutely chronic.
Thank you. Another question just came in. Collaboration seems to align with geopolitical alignments. not a new phenomenon, though. However, this should necessarily retard the progress in a given area of engineering because the collaborators are necessarily from the same block geopolitically. How could this end up in how could this end up in 50 years down the line?
Okay, I think I got that. Okay, so
sorry, yeah, I should have read it first. Sorry, it came just in.
It's a good question. It feels like a good question. Maybe you could just read it again. The listeners can bear with us.
Collaboration seems to align with geopolitical alignments, not a new phenomenon. However, for the progress in a given area of engineering, because the collaborations are necessary from the same aren't necessarily from the same block geopolitically, how could we end up with this in 50 years? Where would we end up in 50 years' time?
Yeah, so I think the engineering profession, as I said previously, sort of occupies quite a unique position in being the bridge between the desires of policymakers and society more broadly, and the implementation of something on the ground that will realize those desires. And for many years, those desires and needs have been perceived and articulated around geopolitical positions, one bloc against another, or, as I said earlier, the explosive growth of consumerism and the rise of affluence. But there is a growing realization, particularly amongst the younger generations, that we face essentially an existential threat in many of these challenges, and a shift towards demanding and requiring that solutions are developed and brought forward, and that is really replacing, to some extent, the strength of these other drivers and needs. So I think 50 years is a long time, but I think generationally we will see a radical shift in the next 20 years in terms of the prioritization of what those needs and desires are, and engineers' role a bridging between those and the delivery in the field and on the ground of solutions that address those and make those realizable. So I'm optimistic in the longer term that there would be a shift that breaks out of our current sort of geopolitical isolationist silos. But I think to get to that point, we as engineers need to play our role advocating for increased international collaboration across jurisdictions and domains that would not necessarily wish to come together and collaborate. So I know that sounds very, it's very difficult, and it sounds almost utopian to be searching for that in the reality of what's happening in the world today, particularly in Eastern Europe with Ukraine and the Russian Federation, etc. But and the tensions developing between China and Australia and the United States, etc. But I think that that shouldn't stop us as engineers, given the unique position we occupy, to advocate strongly for a change and support the younger generations in advocating for that change. I think engineers are fundamentally in a very powerful position as this bridge. Nothing can happen without engineers making that bridge between the desires of policymakers and society more broadly and the reality of what's on the ground in terms of infrastructure and physical built environments.
Thank you, Tim. I think that will draw a close, on the questions. Thank you very much, Tim, for giving your time this afternoon on the webinar and preparing the report in the first place to make us sit up and take notice on this issue, as we need to work collaborative to tackle the large-scale global challenges that we now face. And engineers, as you say, are in a unique position. We have the right skill set. We should be able to help with this collaboration and to help tackle these global challenges. We do obviously have some way to go and need help from elsewhere. We need government changes and learning institutes as well to change the learning. So without any further hesitation, I think we can draw a close to the webinar. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, and thank you to the audience for joining us.